Welcome back, guys. I got a good show lined up for you. This is a Q&A episode, and I'm going to cover two questions about conditioning. One is about inclines for prepping for mountain hunts, and the other is about building training volume and maintaining aerobic base. Before we get to those, I want to let you know about a really cool free tool that I built for you. It's called the Pack Capacity Calculator. So I was looking at a problem that a lot of hunters have, and that is how much weight are they actually prepared to carry in their pack at a given time? And there wasn't a good answer out there for hunters. So I went and I got it for us, looking at research from mountaineering, from military research, and then using some good old computer spreadsheets to build a tool that calculates your estimates your safe pack carriage range capacity based on the outcome of our 10-minute step-up test, which is a test we've used for a while with 20% of your body weight, 12-inch step, translates really well to efficiency under load uphill from a conditioning standpoint. But we can also use that outcome to project what is likely safe for you to carry while hiking uphill. Again, that tool is totally free. I have a link to the article that I wrote about it in this show notes for this show. So you can go to the article, read about how I developed it, and then download it totally for free. And then you have it to use for the rest of your life. So as you retest yourself on the 10-minute step-up test, you have a good gauge of where you are with not only your ability to sustain hard uphill hikes, but how much weight you could carry on a pack out or a load in or anything like that. So for example, let's say that you have an elk hunt coming up and you got to be ready to pack out some heavy elk quarters. Well, can you actually handle having them on your pack on the way out for an uphill hike? Maybe you're going on a 10 to 15 day backpack sheep hunt, something like that. Your load out to go is going to be about 60 pounds. Well, this will tell you whether or not you're ready to carry that 60 pounds. So again, the link to the article is in the show notes, and within that article is the link to the pack capacity calculator. Now, I want you to go read the article and get the good information about how we devised it, how to use it, how to do this 10-minute step-up test, all that kind of stuff. Go through that first, download the pack capacity calculator, and then put yourself through the 10-minute step-up test so you have a good idea of where you're at right now. Okay? All right, so that covered. Let's get to the questions. So this first question came in from an Instagram follower, and he said that he is prepping for a mountain hunt. Should his zone 1 and zone 2 volume training be more incline at a slower speed? This is one of those answers that's, it's going to get a little complicated. And it starts with, it depends, right? So, answers about incline and zone 1 and zone 2 training depends on someone's current fitness level, how much experience they have on grades, and how much grade work, incline work they've been doing at this time. So for most people, I'm going to say that for a lot of hunters, let's say it this way. At this point in the year, they haven't been doing a bunch of incline work. So it's February 19th as I record this. At this point in the year, a lot of aerobic work can be general, right? So it doesn't even necessarily have to be a ton of incline work unless you have very, very little experience with doing incline work. You can be doing more general means. So you can be doing some incline work, you can be running, you can be rowing, you can be riding the bike. Anything that really starts to accrue aerobic volume for you at this point in the year is going to be a good thing. Now, that said, you do want some incline work. Now, does it have to be super steep? No, and in a lot of cases, it really shouldn't be, depending on the person. So, a lot of our members in Pack Mule, whether it's in the Pathfinder program, Backcountry Ready, or Elite program, they've been with us for a while. So they have a lot of experience on not only hunting on steeper grades, but also hiking and doing incline work on steeper grades. So for them, they can handle it because they're not going to accrue as much muscular fatigue from doing that. Now, I'll make a general recommendation for a lot of them, even them at this point in the year, where I'd like to see them more around a 10% incline on the treadmill. And that is because it's going to decrease demand on muscles. so that you can move at a faster rate of speed. You can develop more tissue tolerance, so you get more reactivity out of your legs. That means, when they hit, you're moving at a faster rate, so they learn to absorb force better. And also, we don't accrue as much fatigue in our muscles when we're moving on a less steep grade, on like a 10% grade. So somewhere between 8% and 12%. Now, on a steeper grade, let's call it 12 to 15%, or even up to like a 20% grade, you're gonna create way higher tension in your muscles, and you're also going to make blood pull more in your legs, and so it increases the time that your foot is on the ground, and it also decreases the time of that blood traveling back to your heart, which right now isn't something that we necessarily need. We have time to be able to build that as we get going. So right now, what we really want to work on is improving oxygen intake, development of our aerobic system, which means we're increasing the amount of how much blood our heart pumps out with each beat and throughout the minute. So each beat is called stroke volume. Throughout a minute, how much blood your heart pumps out is called cardiac output. So we want to increase that. We want to increase capillary density. We want to increase the amount of blood that you actually have, which is called plasma volume. And we want to increase mitochondrial density. That's determined by the heart rate that you have. Now, it is easier to maintain that heart rate without drifting or having to slow down at a decreased grade, at like an 8 to 12%, somewhere around the 10% grade. So you have a higher sustainable speed. You can typically go for a longer duration, and you can typically handle more volume from week to week, and it's easier to build that volume. So at this point in the year, things don't need to be as steep. You just don't need it yet, unless you have like a bear hunt coming up when bear season's open here in the next couple months. Then you might want to consider it. But even then, right now, if you're not at the point where you've developed yourself, or you've done a lot of incline work, working at like a 10% incline and being able to move faster is likely going to be better for you, because we're building an aerobic base. You're building that tissue tolerance gradually, that ability to absorb force, redirect it, and then drive yourself back uphill. And you need efficiency. We don't really need super high grade specificity yet. So, you'll get out in the mountains and you'll get on some way steeper grades, and you'll need to be able to do that under load. But there's time. Right now, we need to gradually build up to that, especially if you're someone that hasn't been on an incline all that much. Because we know, and this is one of the things that I talk about in the article about the pack capacity calculator, your metabolic cost increases linearly with the increase in percentage of the grade. So that means you need more oxygen, and that means that you burn more calories, right? You need more fuel. You're going to be able to climb. And so very steep grades increase all of that disproportionately. And so at this point in the year, if you get that, you're going to create way more muscle damage. And so zone 2 doesn't become quite as moderate anymore, because you're actually increasing the stress on your muscles. And then you'll increase the fatigue, right? So that limits your ability to train your aerobic system. It also is going to limit your ability to get in some of the other training that you likely need, which would be some of the relative strength training, the strength endurance training, all of that kind of stuff. So we want to really maintain on developing our slow twitch muscle fibers, like we're talking about, and do that without limiting the central adaptations that we need, which would be the heart, lungs, all of that kind of stuff. So we don't want a bunch of high muscle tension with our aerobic training right now, and we don't want a lot of that blood pulling in our muscles right now. So if you don't have a ton of experience on an incline, you're really looking at regular old zone 1 and zone 2 work for aerobic development, that it doesn't need to be super specific right now. You're better off hanging around like a 10% grade, even if you don't have a lot of experience with it, starting with like an 8% grade and working up. This is a really really good place to be, because on a faster treadmill, you have a lower grade with a faster treadmill, you have a longer stride, you have, and your durability is better. So you build up that tolerance that you need gradually rather than jumping into these super high grades, which you have to strain to adapt to, and could take away from some of the other things that we're trying to do with conditioning right now. So if you have experience, you're an experienced on incline treadmill work and inclined hiking and stuff for aerobic development, you're probably fine to stay at a steeper grade. But if you're asking me this question, my guess is that you don't have a ton of experience with that. So the best thing to do is start with a less intense grade, somewhere between 8 and 12%. 10 is a nice middle point, and go faster. Okay. So that would be a great place to start. Obviously, I don't know the timing of this person's hunt. I don't know when they're going or where they're going, because then the specificity of grade as you get closer is going to get even more important. So we want to gradually increase to that by getting enough volume in right now, moving faster in zone 1 and zone 2. The faster you can move in zone 1 and zone 2, the better, because you get more development out of your slow twitch muscle fibers. You get those central adaptations that we were talking about, and you get the improved tissue tolerance. That's one of the reasons that we have, like, when we see folks start to smoke our 3-mile rucking assessment, we start to move them towards running, like run walk intervals and lower incline work, because the slower work just isn't going to develop their aerobic system anymore, right? So we have to start, progress, and then you have to do, if you're going on a mountain hunt, you got to do loaded incline work at some point. Get on the stair climber, get on the incline treadmill with your pack on, and it's best if you have access to terrain also to go out and get on it with that. But at this point in the year, especially if you don't have a bunch of experience, the best thing to do is to start on a lower incline and go a little bit faster in zone 1 and zone 2. Okay. So second question, this is a longer one. This one actually comes from a Pathfinder member. One of our Pathfinder members put this one in a form. I asked for some podcast questions to get people's questions answered. And so I'm going to read the question and then give you the answer. This could be a little bit more complicated one. So the gist of this question is to better understand building and maintaining an aerobic base over time, years, not just 1 year. I know the general progression is that you want to increase volume from 5% to 10% weekly over time. But if you keep doing this, eventually you will run out of time. So obviously at some point during the year, it turns into maintaining. How much volume is that? And does it also mean that at some point your volume load resets and goes down? Hopefully this question makes sense. But if not, I can try to explain better. It makes sense. It's a good question. So let's start with increasing weekly volume. Yeah, for a lot of people, since we're not professional athletes and we're not endurance athletes that just construct our entire lives around training, you will run out of time at some point. So then we have to look at the distribution of volume, and that's what's going to be just as important with maintaining, right? And then we also have to look at, well, what other aspects of your conditioning do you need to develop now that you're to that point, so that you are more well-rounded conditioning, you have better aerobic power, and just have overall more efficiency. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to continually test to figure out exactly what it is that you need. So you're going to run out of time. So at some point it does become maintaining. But if you look at the yearly flow that we go through as hunters, right? So we have early off season where we're building more and more aerobic volume. It gives us a long runway to be able to shift into more intense training and more specific training. Then we go through those blocks where aerobic volume is essentially put into maintenance for a little bit until we get to the more specific training of hiking up and down mountains. Or what would prepare us to hike up and down mountains. And then we go and hunt, and the volume is going to change from there, right? And so essentially that is your reset, right? Because you're going to come back around to the beginning of the next year. Hopefully you're going to test, see where your aerobic system is at this point, and see what you might need. So you do essentially get that reset. Now what you do when you start the progression back over is, after you test, you see, okay, well, where is my aerobic threshold? Has it changed? Has it gone down? Has it increased? And then that's one of the reasons that we've really started using the cardiac drift test, because it tells us how durable your aerobic system is. So can it maintain output over time? And if it can't, you're at a point where you need to skew your volume towards doing aerobic work, because you have to get that durability back. You have to get the ability to maintain aerobic output over time so that you're efficient with it over time and you don't lean too much towards your lactate systems, your glycolytic system, faster than you should. So you do essentially get a reset, and that's why it's so important to test. Also, we're looking at people with regular lives, right? And that's one of the things where we talk about, well, you're going to run out of time at some point. Now, if you look at what it's going to take for someone that is super well trained and is more an endurance athlete and is running ultras, doing big mountaineering expeditions, things like that, they're going to need more volume in general to maintain what they have. And so for them, maintaining looks like 3 to 4 hours at times, right? And so for us, that maintenance volume to stay where we need to be able to develop what we need to do for hunting, is probably more like 2 to 2.5 hours for maintenance, right? But once you have a well-developed aerobic system, distribution becomes even more important. And when I say distribution, let's say that, that 2 hours is what you can manage at one time, and that's going to be your maintenance volume. Well, 4 30-minute workouts to accrue that 2 hours is okay, and you won't lose, but it won't maintain it as well as you could. What we need to look at is continued time in the zone during one session to maintain your durability across time. So that means longer sessions. So let's say arbitrarily that someone's going to do 2 hours to maintain their aerobic system. That would look more like either a 45-minute session during the week and then a longer 75-minute session on the weekend, or a 30-minute session during the week and then a 90-minute session over the weekend, right? As much aerobic volume as you can handle and recover from is always going to be the good thing to do, as long as it's not leaching from the other time that you need to do things, right? And so we want to be around 2 hours is where I set for regular people and normal hunters and things like that. If you can keep it higher, then absolutely keep it higher. But as you get into more and more aerobic training, the duration of your session is going to matter more and more and more to continue to maintain your efficiency of producing energy aerobically over time. And then you get to the point where, let's say you have a good drift rate. So a good drift rate is between 3 and 5%. So that means over time, if you do a drift test that lasts an hour, during the first 30 minutes, when you compare the first 30 minutes of the test to the second 30 minutes of the test, your heart rate has only drifted upwards from the first 30 minutes to the second 30 minutes by 3 to 5%. Okay? In that range, that means you have pretty good aerobic durability, and that whatever aerobic threshold you set for yourself is likely right. Now, if you're starting to get to the point where you're really down towards 3 or lower than 3, it's time to look at some other conditioning methods, or your aerobic threshold might have actually increased more than you realized. But then we get there and say, okay, your drift rate's really good. Then we would look at something like a lactate threshold test to see if it's time to push your lactate threshold up. So we always want to move up our aerobic threshold before we push our lactate threshold, because we want to make ourselves more efficient with generating aerobic energy aerobically, and more efficient using fat for fuel before we worry about putting too much volume into developing our glycolytic pathways, or using carbohydrates for fuel. Now, like I've said before on other podcasts, all of your energy systems are active all the time. Just intensity and duration determine which energy system is going to predominate at a given time. So, for example, that's one of the reasons that we want to lower the relative intensity of what you're doing by developing your aerobic system, but then also doing some high intensity stuff on top of that, so that your relative intensity of whatever you're doing stays lower, so you're more efficient and you can use aerobic energy for longer. But you're going to get to the point where you also have to push your lactate threshold. And so that's when we would look at a lactate threshold test and look at the difference between the top of your zone 2 and the top of your zone 3. Now, if there's still an astronomical difference, we're going to still worry more about aerobic development, while depending on the time of the year and what's necessary, layering in some higher intensity stuff. But we need to really look at that first. And so from progressing from year to year, it really comes down to testing and looking at the duration of sessions that you're going to need to move yourself forward. And so that's why, you could go and do, let's say you can do 4 45-minute sessions per week, and you do those and you do it for 3 months. Well, then test and see, well, did this move me forward? If not, then you know that it's either you need to increase your volume, or you need to maintain your volume at that level and then redistribute it so that you're spending more time in the zone at one time. And that is the best way to consider developing your aerobic system over time. Now, these 5 to 10% increases weekly, that's mostly during a development phase. You want to progressively walk that volume up to a place where you can maintain it. Now, maintenance is going to look like, a slight decrease, maybe up to 30% less than, for most people, than what you can achieve during a development block. And so when you look at what most people can achieve during a development block, it's going to be around 3, maybe 4 hours. That's why I say around 2 hours is going to be a good place, because that's about, you're looking at 2/3 of your time if you're doing 3 hours. If you're doing 4 hours, obviously you walk that up to 2.5 hours to be able to maintain what you're doing. So that's what that looks like. Now, if you're really well aerobically developed, that's probably going to look more like 2 longer sessions. So maybe 2 75-minute sessions per week, up to 2 2-hour sessions per week. A lot of people don't have time for that, so we have to be able to make our trades, right? And you have to look at what the priority is, and you need to know what the priorities are based on testing, goals, and what you need to do to be prepared for the hunts that you're going on, or the season that you're looking at, to be able to make sure that you have enough aerobic durability, but also that you have the other qualities that you need to be able to go out and perform on that hunt and also stay safe. And so it's a pretty comprehensive answer to that question. So that should answer it, right? So you're looking at, somewhere between around 3 to 4 hours for development for regular folks like us as you develop, and you're going to walk up to that 5% to 10% a week over time. Sometimes those development phases can take longer for some people. Some people don't respond as fast. And, throughout the course of the year, sometimes you have to just make your trades and realize that, that you have to start shifting towards other kinds of training volume to be prepared, because you have to give your body that kind of stress. And so is it optimal always? No, but sometimes we have to deal with what's realistic and not what's optimal, right? But if you can deal with what's optimal, sometimes it's going to look like 2 longer sessions. Like if you look at what a lot of mountaineers, people like that do longer expeditions, you're looking at at least two 2-hour zone 1, zone 2 sessions, and then like a hit session or something mixed in there. But they have to distribute their volume a little bit differently than folks like us do. But if you have the time for that, absolutely. And then you'll walk up to that 5 to 10% per week for as long as it takes to get to the point where you're still making progress. And that's why it's important to continually test. We test every 12 to 13 weeks. In some cases, we test sooner, and it depends on the training phase and what we're trying to accomplish. But that's really going to be the gist of it. You get that reset by going through the cycle of the training year. You test to find out where you're at. You look at your aerobic durability. You look at where your aerobic threshold is. You look at where your lactate threshold is. And then when you hit that development volume that really takes you forward, and you need to cut back to a maintenance, you're looking at about 30% of what you did to maintain what you're doing. And then you have to look at distribution. You have to start, it's going to be more important to spend more time in the zone during one chunk of training than it will be breaking it all up across the week. And a lot of times those 75 to 90-minute sessions will give you what you need to maintain that. And then you just have to keep retesting your conditioning to make sure you're where you need to be. Okay? So again, on the testing, the 10-minute step-up test, using it not only to figure out where you're at with your hard uphill hikes, but also determine how much pack weight you can carry, because we look at your ceiling, right? So, we do the 10-minute step up test with 20% of our body weight. And so if you can go out and just hammer step ups with 20% of your body weight, you know that your ceiling for carrying more weight is pretty high. But if that crushes you and you don't hit the standards that we set, which you get when you get the pack capacity calculator, then you know that you can't handle much more weight, but you need to do the test first. So click the link in the show notes, go read the article, download the pack capacity calculator, and see where you're at right now, so you know what you need to do to develop yourself. You even get some readouts of, what would be the most important things for you to work on right now based on the outcome of your test. So go download that. It's 100% free. I want you to have it so you can, even if you don't train with us, I want you to know where you are right now to stay safe out there, and also know what you need to do to be prepared. If you know, like, hey, I have no choice but to carry a 70-pound pack into the mountains, know where you are compared to that right now so you can go out and do what you need to do. That is all for this episode. I appreciate you watching, appreciate you listening. I'll continue to do these Q&A episodes. So if you have questions, you can DM them to me on Instagram. I often post a query asking for questions, or you can email me at todd@humanpredatorpackmule.com, and I will do my best to get to everybody's questions as we continue to do Q&A episodes throughout the year. So thanks again for watching and listening.